Charles Leo Maginnis.
That sounds good.
I'm born in San Francisco on July the 20th, 1929.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Today's date is July 23rd, 2018. Okay. So, next. Let's see. So I wanted to mostly pick up bits of the Terra Linda Fire Department. And you had a story you were just telling me a minute ago about the origin of the Terra Linda Fire Department with a fire on Las Colindas Avenue.
I'm not sure where it was on Las Colindas.
I can look it up. But there was a fire on Las Colindas Avenue in the Community Services District, but there wasn't a fire department.
There was no community service.
The Community Service District existed for street lighting at that point.
Yeah.
But there was no fire
department. And tree watering.
Yes. And
we were putting in planting.
But you were part of the county as far as fire service went.
The only fire service we had was county service from the gas station over in front of the now Civic Center, the mobile station over that goes out to
Santa Venetia.
Yeah, on what's the name?
Near the Santa Venetia Market now.
Yeah, but the street it's on is
Civic Center Drive?
No, it's the one. There's a street that comes from San Rafael out around the point and back in. And that,
San
where
Pedro?
What?
San Pedro?
It might be, but the one we have, I don't know whether it's North San Pedro.
I don't know.
It's whatever street goes out to...
At all events, it was a long way away and the house burnt to the ground. And
yeah, well, the house...
Everybody thought they should maybe form a fire department.
So we went to to San Rafael and asked them if we could join San Rafael, and they were not at all interested and suggested we take a running fine. But
well, and there also was a certain amount of opposition to joining San Rafael, I noticed in the IJ around that. So the house burnt down, I believe, in February of 1958. And by the middle of 1958, the CSD and there was some other organization that existed prior to the CSD that kind of amalgamated together at that point. One basically folded up and they joined up with the CSD and gave them their money, and you guys decided to form a fire department, which was curiously filled with quite a number of people who lived on Las Colindas.
No, they didn't.
What?
The biggest group we had lived right where Ring Chop and...
but in terms of street names,
Yeah,
there's like 4 or 5 from Las Colindas in the first roster.
Yeah, there was a few. We were not near one another.
No, Las Colindas is a very long street, but I thought that was perhaps indicative of the fact that you guys probably all saw that first fire, and somebody took photos of that fire as it was happening.
That's
and
the one we
used. The neighbors all trained hoses on it to try and stop it, according to the Independent Journal.
I wasn't at that fire.
Uh-huh. But you were saying something about this other film that was created when you first bought a big fire engine and were trying to set it up.
Well, we had it set up, but we used to train on Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be of information to you. We used to train around the firehouse on, what's the street that goes out there
That's near the firehouse?
Yeah.
No, not Las Vegas. Del Ganado.
on Del Ganado. And one of the things we found out after a little while was that one of the main water lines went down Del Ganado,
Mm-hmm.
which was very handy for us,
Mm-hmm.
except that a lot of housewives worked for a living.
Mm-hmm.
They were starting to have jobs, and they did their laundry on Saturday morning.
Uh-huh.
And the water in this valley has a lot of iron in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were down at the one end of the pipeline running fire hoses and turning them on and off, and it would stir up all the iron in the pipeline, and ladies throughout the district would get
Rust and
their
stains
clothes
in their clothes.
with iron filings mixed in, rust look.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not was not one of our best get along with the neighbors idea. So we decided we'd have to do change, and that's how we came to drill on this street.
Beechnut Court.
Yeah. Because Beechnut had no houses on it. It was at the end of a pipeline, and it was easier to drill up here and not get a lot of unhappiness.
And I remember when I was little here, once we had our house up here, this also was the street you guys used to use for practicing turning the long engine on a cul-de-sac, because we've got a little cul-de-sac, and it is a good place to practice because nobody was going to go and complain because
Well, it was here,
It was
and there
us.
was one over on the other side where they had a tree in the way,
Mhm.
and we used to practice there too.
However, back to the Keith Jones training film. So you guys were practicing with your hoses.
And we were laying a hose lay instead of fire hydrant to fire. We were laying a fire to hydrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that your hose is in backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make a connection because the hose is, you have a female end on the hose and a male end on the hose and a male end on the engine,
Mm-hmm.
or I should say
The
the
hydrant.
hydrant. And you have to put something in between that turns this around. And we found out we
Didn't have a
needed-
double female.
No, we needed a double male at that
You just
point. Let's
contradicted.
see. No, you're right. You need
need a double
no,
female.
You need
said
a
you-
double female to connect. and that there wasn't one on the new
And so
engine.
as you were making this training film, the training film was working out that you guys were like not, it wasn't a good as a training film because it was not working. And so you had lots of pictures done by Keith Jones, who was your lieutenant when you were captain of one of the engines.
B Company.
Who had a 16mm camera and took photos of you guys trying to do the training film, but actually sort of screwing up the ability to connect.
Well, nobody could find the piece that belonged.
And so at some point you made a film with the motto, "We never lose a foundation," that intercut the fire that originally started the whole thing, where the house burnt down, with you guys being inept and not being able to connect your hoses together. And used to show that at fundraisers or whatever it is as a comedy movie. Okay, let me stop for a moment. The woman who kept burning garbage in her backyard even though she wasn't supposed to.
She had a 55-gallon drum, metal drum, and she would load it up and set it on fire. And the neighbor next door, who was not actually in the district, I believe, would call us and say, "I can see the flames over my 6-foot fence, and I'm worried about it." And so we had told her not to do it before, and I could I was the captain that was standing duty that day.
And you'd made several calls on this event previous.
Well, other people had. I had never done it before. But I could issue a citation, and then I'd have to go to court, and then she probably would get it put off to another day, and I'd have to take another day off of work, which I wasn't particularly of the idea that that's what I wanted to do. So we brought engine number 3. We had lots of firemen because it was a Saturday. And so we went up to her house, and I didn't go with the siren. I went quietly up to her house, and I went and rang the doorbell. She came to the door, and I said, "We have to put out the fire." And I had the guys take the rubber hose off the reel, with the reel off the engine, and we dragged it through her living room that had white carpet, and out into the backyard, and put out the fire in the 55-gallon drum, and then it had been in the dirt and the like going out into the yard, and then dragged it back across her white carpet and out of the house, and I said, "Don't ever do that again, or we'll be back." And we never had another call about the 55-gallon drum.
Yeah, and by that point you had a permit process for people who were doing those kinds of things. It was something that was not allowed.
Could,
but she never went and got a permit. She just did this
well,
on a
to
regular
get a
basis.
permit, you had to have a
Correct kind of burner and not shoot
they had
feet
a
6 feet into
cement
the air.
thing that they used to sell at nurseries and the like, that was cement with places, and it had a chimney on it that broke up the stuff. And yes, that was legal.
Wasn't a great idea, but it was
It was
a lot
still
safer
legal.
than 6 feet in the air of flames, freaking out the neighbors.
But
especially as there's a point at which you had 2 fires in quick succession at Dante Mateo School that were caused by a faulty burner, according to the IJ.
well, I think the schools had ones of their own, and the other thing that we had trouble with, one of our biggest fire problems was the garbage truck on Monday morning, which came from the garbage man going and collecting the garbage. And people had a tendency to have a fire in their new fireplace, being that we'd all moved out from the city, and we had fireplaces, which we didn't have much in the city, in apartments and things like that. And so everybody was very impressed with having a fireplace. And so they would have fires all weekend, but then they wanted to get the garbage out. So amongst other things, they would gather, usually in a cardboard box, but sometimes some of the better people put them in metal cans. And the ashes would cook overnight. They were theoretically out, but
They weren't actually out.
they weren't out. And so they would then get dumped into the
Garbage truck.
compressor garbage truck, and they would light the load over a block or two. They would have all this new stuff to burn, and they would light the load up, and you had a garbage
Flaming
truck
garbage truck.
that was burning inside the can, but you couldn't get to it. I mean, you could lay out the load for a block or two, and then put it out and then load it back in. But what the garbage company used to do was, if that happened, they'd pull the alarm, we'd all turn out, and we just had the pickup at that point, and we'd try and put it out with water, but the water just went right through. And so what we would do is go out on the highway and follow the garbage truck, pouring water on it all the way up to the
dump at
the dump up north of Novato, and then follow the garbage truck back after they'd emptied, and they'd have to turn it in and have all their hydraulics replaced underneath that compress the load and all like that. And that happened several times. The other thing was we all had garbage disposal. And I don't know whether Eichler or whoever put in cheap garbage disposal. I suspect that was it. And as a result...
And everybody used garbage disposals for everything in those days.
Yeah, but
It just...
I don't think they were the finest of garbage.
No.
And they'd get a load put on them, and the load would eventually eat up the wiring and get it smoldering. But nobody noticed this, and we'd all go to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning. The thing would start smoking up the house, And most of them in those days were under, the sinks were under a set of windows,
Uh-huh.
and there was just one board of plywood outside that, to the outside, and it would light that thing off. And we would arrive at 2 in the morning to put out your garbage disposal. And that wasn't ideal, but it was. But those were the kind of fires we had. We didn't have major fires much. And for the most part, they were put out by the pickup. But we started buying bigger engines to get our insurance down. The more you had of the larger engines, the lower your insurance rates were.
Well, and I noticed that when they were discussing in the paper the formation of having a fire department for the Community Services District of Terra Linda, that they pointed out that what you'd be paying in terms of rates for adding a fire department was way less than the amount of very high insurance rates you had by not having a fire department.
Yes. And
It was costing about $150 to the average homeowner a year in raised insurance rates.
and the people that we modeled after there's a seminary down at Cordham, at Strawberry, really, just before you go on the what is that thing there? Richardson Bay Bridge, the old, in those days, the old wooden one. And there's a seminary there in the hills, and so they had the pickup, like they told us to get, and they had lots of help because the young men that were learning to be ministers could be pressed into service and got paid a little something for sleeping in the firehouse. And that's who gave us the idea and the size where we started out with just a pickup.
Okay, then this would be a good point to talk about the 4 different fire vehicles that you ended up with over time.
Well,
number one.
originally we had a Chevy pickup truck, new, that we had, what's the name of that fire company?
Van Pelt?
Yeah, Van Pelt put the equipment on for us, which was some piping so that we could control the water flow, and a 250-gallon tank, and we bought hose, and which was very touchy because the hydrants were, I believe, every 200 yards, and we carried 250 yards of hose.
I thought you got like 100 yards of hose, or
No, we had
150.
we had over 250, so that there was a little play in there. And so you would connect that to the hydrant pump. The pump could pull that much water in, and then we'd shoot it on out with the pressure of the pump on the engine. And that was, what was I gonna say about, but it was touchy because the hydrants were not that,
Visible?
well, you know, we were very close to our maximum.
Not if you're talking 250 and they're only 200 apart.
Well,
why I
yeah,
think-
but if you missed it, you couldn't, or anything like that. If you spotted the wrong one, you had to get the closest one. And in the gasoline fire that I told you about,
We haven't got to the gasoline fire yet, but yes, I will bring that one up later.
okay, well, at that fire, when we got to where the hydrant should be, we couldn't find it. Is there somebody flying
Yes, you
over?
have a hummingbird directly over you.
Anyhow, we had a hard time. We knew where the hydrant should be, but it wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked around, and the lady who lived there didn't like having a hydrant in front of her house, so she grew a bush around it.
So that you couldn't see where it was.
We couldn't find the hydrant, so we took out the axe and trimmed it for her. But you learn a lot of things, like these boards on the roof
Mm-hmm.
are about 8 inches by 2 inches thick.
Mm-hmm.
And in manuals, they tell you things like you've got to get air into the house, so you should chop through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we had a fire,
Mm-hmm.
chopping through 2 inches of
redwood.
redwood,
Plus the tar
The-
paper and rock.
the fire is kind of over by that time. So we got in the habit of pulling a piece of plywood.
Off of the sides instead. Yeah. Let's see. What was I gonna?
Another thing.
Truck number 2. Truck number 2 actually has the most interesting pile of stories about it.
Well, truck number 2, we bought secondhand from Menlo Park. And Menlo Park, although you think if it's a little town, it's eventually where when they send guys to like Kansas City when they blew up the building,
Mm-hmm.
that's where they come from. Menlo Park is the San Mateo County.
Trauma center
Well,
kind of.
they train guys that are experts in that,
Mm-hmm.
and they have dogs and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But they had started out as a fire company
Mm-hmm.
many years ago, where they bought a hose truck and I think a pump
Mm-hmm.
and no horses.
Mm-hmm.
And you needed horses to move them, but they were in the middle of hay country,
Mm-hmm.
all there. And the first guy who got there with a team of horses got $20. And everybody's out in the field working, and I think they paid 10 to the second.
Mm-hmm.
And they never
But
ever
do-
kept horses there.
Andy. Thus you got your fire reported plus a whole team of horses ready to go
You
attached
got
to it.
more than one team. You got everybody
Your
in the
choice of horses.
district $20.
Yes. But obviously you did not get one that was a horse-drawn one. You
No,
got
they
what,
had
a
a
1940
1941 engine
a
that
La
they,
France.
yeah, that they kept there just because it counted as another engine. But they were buying a new one, and they really didn't have the room for it.
Uh-huh. And so you got a good deal
So-
because
So we got a good deal, but it had one flaw in it. The front wheel kingpins were shot. Now, we had a district that's about a little
4 miles
over
by
a
6
mile in
miles?
one direction from the fire, and a little less than a mile in the other direction. And the whole district is 2 miles long and about a quarter of a mile wide.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't really a big problem for us
Mm-hmm.
because we never got out of second gear. And
But when you had to drive it on the highway on those
Yeah.
rare occasions,
but sometimes the county would request us to take care of a patch of highway that wasn't in our district, but you do things for one another. And they sent us out. And the law says that if you run your siren, you have to go over in the fast lane. And our problem was nobody had let us in the fast lane because the left-hand lane, because they were going faster than we could. And we would have to drive up the highway to Smith Road, go under the highway, and come back down to get to the fire.
because like they hadn't cut the crossway through to
Well, we would come across, but we didn't go the wrong way on the highway.
no, I was just thinking the Marinwood cut. The cut from between Terre and Marinwood happened rather late. I didn't realize.
Well, Marinwood is further up.
Oh, okay.
The thing was, we didn't have an overpass in those days. We had to take our chances, and
And you
it
had
was
a
very
fire
interesting.
truck that could basically go 35 miles an hour
Yeah,
and
40
shimmying
we
the whole
were
time.
pushing it. We would be wobbling at 45.
Which is why they were willing to give it up so cheaply.
Yeah.
But which didn't make any difference in the valley.
No, and a little thing about myself was I knew the numbering system in the valley, but I never memorized the streets. I knew there was the fruit was in one section, and there was various big pieces. But my method was, if I had to go down and take the engine out, I followed the kids on bicycles.
Because the kids would know where the fire was before you
And
guys
they were already, there was a stream of them going to the fire by the time we got down and took the engine out. And so we would just follow them, and they'd take us right to the fire. And it was never necessary. I knew if they gave a number, I knew it would be this way or that, but I didn't know this street went into this street or anything like that.
But they did, so it was easiest to follow them.
They were infallible, even late at night. You just followed the bikes and you got there, because every kid had a bike.
I remember.
And it was knee-deep in kids.
Yeah, because pretty much you had a pile of parents and a pile of kids, all approximately the same age, baby boom, in full boom. And
That's why they bought a house. They had an apartment, but one thing led to another. And they suddenly had 2 kids.
and left the city and
And so they,
joined mid-century American suburbia. Okay, engine, or the truck, whatever, number 3, all I know is you guys bought it from the Civil Defense. Bergen
Yeah,
County
that
Civil
was
Defense.
rather late,
Mm-hmm.
and it was mainly to give we had the chief across the way at the gas station,
Mm-hmm.
and we had our hired hand
Mm-hmm.
who was,
Walser,
Walster.
the hired.
And so they needed 2 cars, and
Mhm.
Walter, having learned the lesson of fire chiefs,
Yeah,
the
you don't
rule-
arrive before the engine does. So, basically, that gave him
a car,
another car.
and then
At one point, he had a police car because he
Well,
was also
later
the,
on,
the,
we
the
traded-
police.
every year the state bought new cars for the
Uh-huh.
police department and everything.
Mhm.
And they'd ask you if you wanted to buy
A used.
no, these were
a
brand
one.
new.
Oh, okay.
A brand new car.
But they'd
And-
get the wholesale rate as they were the state of California.
Yeah, they got a rate that we could keep the car for a year. Some places did longer, but we tended to keep the car for a year and sell it for more than what we bought it for, thus making a small profit.
And having a new car each year. I remember Chief Walser would drive around this little police car and harangue the teenage boys who referred to it as the Walser-mobile. And I
Yeah.
remember even as a little kid, we were highly suspicious
Well,
of
he
him.
gave ticket. He was an officious person.
Yes.
He wanted to be something,
Yeah.
and
Well, and according to the IJ, there was a whole lot of teenagers who were inclined to drive down, Manuel T. Paredes at considerably over the 35-mile-an-hour speed
oh
limit.
yes.
So he cut
but-
down on that.
He did that. At one time, they wanted to arm all us firemen and make us off-duty policemen, and I was not in favor of that one. You know, that we could patrol little.
Yeah.
as-
I can't imagine that would have gone over big with you.
It just, but that was one. They had more jobs for us. My favorite was the time the 2 kids got lost.
2 kids got lost.
Yeah. There was a family that moved into the valley,
Yes.
and they had 2 kids, and you're moving stuff out of a van and everything else, and they basically said, oh, you know,
Kid,
just
go
take
away and
care
wander
of
away for a while.
yourself. And it got dark, and nobody knew where the kids were.
Uh-huh.
And so we were called out,
Mm-hmm.
and we had guys on all the hills all over calling out their names and looking for them. And we didn't have the equipment for hunting down injured people or anything like that. And we finally got spread out on all the hills, and it turns out that they came to the gate up at the air.
Force space. They just
Yeah.
kept walking
Yeah, they
until
got
they
the
found some
Nevada.
place.
Or whatever.
Ignacio.
And walked up to the gate and said, oh.
They got lost.
And so then we had a hard time getting the firemen back up the hills. We were blowing the siren.
Yeah, because no cell phones. Speaking of which, before I move on to engine number 4, I should inquire, describe the process by which a person who had a fire would call in a fire, and the process by which you guys let one another know that there was a fire and how to get to the fire.
Okay. Well, originally we started out,
Start with the person.
well, the
Has a
person
fire.
would call I guess, the county operator. I don't know, they'd pick up the phone and say to the AT&T operator that they had a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say they had a fire in Terra Linda.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the Terra Linda Fire Department.
Mm-hmm.
Even though half the valley was in San Rafael. Right?
And some of it wasn't in San Rafael or in Terra Linda.
Right.
It was in the county.
But we took, and a lot of them were pool problems. Namely, my little Willie went under, and we have him up on the cement.
And he's not breathing.
And he's not doing too well. And we had this gadget that we had bought for many hundreds of dollars, and felt that, the only chance the kid had was the soonest one of those got there. And there was no firehouse over across the highway at that time. They sent an engine out from San Rafael, which was a good distance. It's, what is it? It's 4 miles, I think.
Oh, it's more than that.
Well, the highway is 4 miles to San Rafael, so I'd say probably 5 to 6 to get to the place. And so if we got the call, we'd tell the operator, this isn't for us, give it to San Rafael. It's San Rafael district. But we would go to with the
The resuscitator.
resuscitator so that we could take care of the problem before 6 minutes went up. Because you got 4, and they had called us. Now, in most cases, the kid just coughed it up and was all right even when we got there. But it tended to irritate San Rafael that we were standing around with this
Resuscitator thing.
shiny resuscitator when they showed up. And their chief resented it because he was of the theory, and I guess rightly so, he'd never get anything.
No funding for a
He
new
wouldn't
resuscitator.
enlarge his fire department and thus be a bigger chief and thus get better pay if we didn't get out of here. And we could beat him to a fire any place in his district because we were stuck in the middle of it.
In the Terra Linda part of the district, you mean? Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
there was
Yeah, no,
part
it's-
that way
it's all
and
over.
part running along. We couldn't get to the
No, but I mean, you wouldn't be able to get to San Rafael any faster than you would get from San Rafael to
no,
you. But for the
but
district
they
that
were
was
coming
San
out
Rafael
here.
within the Terra Linda area.
and we got the call first because they didn't have 911 in those days. You just got a telephone
well, and the person on the line had to tell you where the fire was.
Yeah, but when they told us, we
So-
would look on the map and know it was out of our district.
But let's say it was in your district. Then what would you do?
We would go and
Chalkboard. I'm searching for you to tell me about the chalkboard.
the chalkboard.
Yes, because when you would go to a fire, you'd get a call in, and you knew it was a fire for you. But you've got a pile of volunteers who all have to come.
Well, they would write
So first
something
you'd
on-
run the siren to get everybody
They
to come.
would write on the thing.
You write the address on the chalkboard.
And when they had a driver and a maybe one or two other guys, the engine would go.
So the rest of the guys would drive from their homes to
To
the
the
firehouse because they'd heard the siren, and they'd look at the chalkboard, and then they'd drive to wherever the fire was.
Right.
Okay, that was what I was hoping you would.
And the after that, we got the plectrons.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the plectrons.
Now the plectrons were a gadget that after the ring, or I should say, the chief got to the fire, he looked and he saw what he had, and we had a tuning fork.
Uh-huh.
And he turned on the radio and he struck the tuning fork, and all our plectron units in our house
Yeah.
were set at that. Each fire district had its own thing on the tuning schedule.
Uh-huh.
And
So,
that would
plectron.
set off the thing, and he would say where the fire was, and anything else he needed to say.
So describe the plectron.
The plectron was a unit in our house that went behind our bed, and it was shut off and didn't make any noise until somebody struck the plectron.
The correct tuning fork at the other end.
Yeah, and
At
that
which
turned
point-
on all the ones in the district, and you could listen to all.
You'd have a really loud siren in your bedroom waking you up.
And then it would be on the radio frequency.
All the information. So you
And-
could go directly from your house to the fire.
Wives tended to leave it on while you were at a fire, and we had a call that we would put over when the fire was out and everybody was safe, so that, because we had another hour or so to reload the fire engine and take care of everything. But that said, everyone is safe, basically. It was a number code we used to give out. And but the worst case in ours was we went to Hawaii once. And Grandma and Grandpa moved out here to take care of Henry
I
and
was sitting, taking care of the dog.
yeah. And I guess you went with us. Anyhow, they were having a fine time, and all of a sudden a siren went off, and that wasn't bad. But for another week or so, it talked to them because they didn't know to
How to
read.
turn it off.
Reset it.
Just plectrons are kind of an interesting thing, you know. Once you've moved past the chalkboard stage, it's a transitional thing between now modern notions of how you go and collect a group. And what's interesting is, though plectrons are 1950s, 60s technology, there's still a lot of volunteer fire departments who, in rural places where 911 is a rather limited situation, that go and find those old systems online and repair them and worship them because they're really, really effective. I mean, they set off a serious alarm in your house, and it tells you where to go.
And you know from home. You don't have to go to the firehouse anymore.
And you have detail, like, you know, what you should put on, things like that.
But to show you how you start out with these things,
Mm-hmm.
I used to work with two guys in the phone company who grew up across the street from the Larkspur firehouse. I think it was the Larkspur one.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived diagonal to the firehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And you not only had, whenever they had a fire, and Larkspur was a kind of big district,
Mm-hmm.
so the guy with the whistle
Mm-hmm.
would give a district that the fire was in.
Mm-hmm. By varying the whistle sound.
Yeah, so many beeps were this section, so many. So it would go boop, 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 boop. And then the engines would go out and all like that, because they only had the one firehouse.
Mm-hmm.
But you told the guys, hey, don't drive down to the firehouse, you live in that district.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't give the address, but they'd say what district the fire was. And so that would be another up to 4 toots on the horn. And then when the fire was over and you put everything out and you got the engines back at the firehouse, you tooted to say that everything was good.
Uh-huh.
So an hour and a half later,
There'd be a new
you
tune.
were settling back in bed and whoop, whoop, said that everything was taken care of.
Well, but that's not the Terra Linda one.
That
that's
wasn't Terra
Now,
Linda.
Terra Linda had a big old air raid siren on a pole
Right.
outside the firehouse. And-
Well, originally outside the gas station.
yes, yes. And the gas station was the first official firehouse.
Right.
Explain that.
We were looking for some place to put this pickup truck that we had arranged for, and Flaherty had 3
Dick
chutes.
Flaherty of the mobile station.
Mobile station there, and he had 3 chutes, 2 of which had racks to
For car repair.
car repair and so on, and the third one didn't have a rack.
Mm-hmm.
And so he volunteered that to keep the fire engine. And then he would take it home at night and keep it at his house. And if he was going someplace for a weekend,
It would be parked near.
I would have it, or Ring Chop would have it, or we had a guy in the fire department. He might be on one of those earlier things, who was the assistant fire chief. He was a little short guy, and his ability that made him the assistant fire chief was in World War II. He had been in the San Francisco
Civil defense.
civil defense fire, and they had little fire engines that were made by the White Milk Truck Company, and they had a pump in the back, and they had some hard hoses. I forget whether they were wrapped around the back, but anyhow, he had more experience than the rest of us had. But he had one flaw.
Yes.
He was rather short.
Uh-huh.
And when we bought engine number 2,
Uh-huh.
the flaw was the old 1940 engine didn't have any power brakes on it. And when he would stomp on the brakes, he'd go
Slide back on the
whizzing
seat.
back on the seat, which wasn't adjustable.
It was just a bench seat.
It was just a bench, and he would go whizzing back, because there was more power on the brake than he could put on. So we used to carry an old gas mask box or resuscitator box that sat behind the driver's seat in there. There's a little, like, tray there, so that he could pull that out and put it behind him in case he was driving. So
he
he'd
wouldn't
have
slide
enough
back and he
pressure
could push
to
down
push
properly
on the
on the
brake.
brake.
But I don't know whether he moved or whether he just got tired of us, but he wandered away. And then I think Ring Chuck got moved up to being assistant chief.
Well, I'm going to pause for a second so that I can go and look up the names, and I will bring that out to you in there for there. Hold on. Okay.
There tends to be people that, when you start an organization like this, are great authorities on things, but they don't do any work. They're great for giving opinions on everything, and that's how I got busy in the department. I was in the department and was just like any other volunteer, but I had worked in supply in the Marine Corps. Because I never worked at my job. Nobody dropped an atomic bomb. And so I was supply sergeant a couple of places. And this one guy, he got a light and siren for his car and everything. But he never came to the drills. Except maybe at the end when we were going to have a beer or something. And he went to the meetings of the CSD and gave great speeches on things, but he was rather robust. And when you load the hose in the truck, you have a metal back to the truck. The hose goes in there fine. But it's nicer if you have a wood thing that lifts it up a little bit, comes out. But it's, and we didn't have that much money. And he went and ordered one of those for us at 80 some bucks. And when it was polished, it was a beautiful job, but
It was not the sort of thing you could afford.
yeah, we were borrowing hose from somebody. We didn't even own our own hose, and we didn't have two sets of it. There's two sets of coveralls I have in the back, one of which has a big rip on one side.
Yeah, I've never found these coveralls, by the way. I've looked for them, but...
Well, there's one in there that's the good one.
Well, I'll look for them.
Okay. Anyhow, we went to a fire on a Sunday morning. That may have been the You Pray We'll Spray.
Which
And
we'll
we
tell the
came
Stats
back
later.
to Ring, I think it was, no, it was Flaherty's house, because we had to load hose in because our other hose was wet from the fire we'd been. And you change out your hose at that time. So we had some other rolls of hose. And we were feeding it in, and another fire alarm came in. And the pump control, whether the water went this way or went the other way, depending on whether where the hydrant was, and so on. And you pulled it to shut it off. Well, I was standing there putting hose in the back end or something, but I was up by the driver thing for some reason, wiping off the controls or whatever, and the alarm went off, and I bent over, and this valve lever was down, and it went into my pocket and ripped my
The back end of your coveralls off.
yeah, this pocket forward.
Uh-huh.
They got torn, and so that's why I had two. And so I had to go, and the coveralls, this is for your information, the coveralls all came from Penny's, because we had a Penny's.
J.C. Penney's in Corte Madera.
Yeah, they are that gray coverall, and that's where we bought them. And our helmets and stuff, and the turnout coats, we bought all that. And one of the things that amused us was when we were looking at helmets to buy, there was one set of helmets that was cheaper than most. And we looked at it, but it had one little thing in the sale, and it was do not expose to get
Flame.
close to fire. It was your fire helmet. So the color coding was regular firemen or
Dark blue.
dark blue or black, I forget which. It
Helmet?
should be black, because that's what their helmet is. And captains wore red helmets, and
had one.
the chief and the deputy chief wore white helmets. But I always liked this better, so I never got around to doing it in a red cap.
Ah.
It makes this stuff stand
Sure.
out better.
But I do remember your
but my
red sort of
helmet was-
fiberglass helmet
It was
Uh,
red.
that was in the garage when I was a kid. So let's get on to the engine number 4.
Engine 4.
Engine 4, which was a big fancy one, was better than what San Rafael had when San Rafael
Yeah.
opted in.
Well,
that
we-
was one of the temptations.
We bought it from Van
Van Pelt.
Pelt. LaFrance and I forget what the other big official one is, all put in bids. But LaFrance did something that I never thought of. And by that time we had, what is the other fire chief?
Walser.
Walser was working for us, and they did something that was very sneaky.
Yes.
They put in their bid, and of course he would have a lot of influence, and they offered him $5,000
As a bribe
as basically that's what it was.
to recommend theirs.
To recommend theirs. And he was smart enough, he took the check and he went to the board
The CSD.
and he said, if you buy this engine, here's a $5,000 discount off of it that was offered to me,
As a bribe.
as a sales commission on the like, but I would recommend
This other one
the
instead.
Van Pelt. he said if they ever got your name on one of those checks, they had you forever.
Yeah. As they could then offer to show it to your
Yeah.
guys. So,
So he didn't go for the $5,000 payoff.
mm-hmm.
And Van Pelt, it wasn't an official, but they made,
Well, they were, they
Tons
had
of 'em
ads
for
in the
this.
Pacific Coast Fire Journal, but they weren't the big name place. They were a
No.
little outfit in California.
but they made a lot for the state. A lot of
Mhm.
state fire engines were.
And they didn't offer to bribe your captain, which would lead one to believe that La France possibly had inflated prices.
Well, they were La France.
Yes.
And I forgot what the other, there's two companies that make engines back east that
Uh-huh.
are a big name.
Mm-hmm.
La France is one, and when I was a kid, the fire engines that come on the block,
Mhm.
they were always La France's and American Standard or something else like that.
Mm-hmm.
They were very good engines,
Mm-hmm.
and they lasted. I thought that fire engines, when I was a kid, to show you how San Francisco, I thought fire engines came with because they were firemen, they had the steering wheel on the right side,
Mm-hmm.
because all La Frances and the old ones, when I was a kid, they were right-sided engine.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to make a thing that you know how I tell you about the Smoky Stovers,
Mm-hmm.
and he and the chief rode around in a little car that only had two wheels on it, and had the hose
cartoon
and the
character?
ladder all. It's a cartoon, and he wore his hat backwards
With a flip
with
up.
a crack in it that he could flip up or flip down, and had a hole in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the room would have people with pictures, but their necktie
Out of
hung
the picture.
out of the picture and so on.
Mhm.
Well, Smoky Stover, I often wondered where they got the idea for that.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was when they first took over fire engines and went into the business of getting rid of the horses,
Mm-hmm.
they took a motor
Mm-hmm.
with two wheels
Mm-hmm.
and room for two guys to sit, and hooked it onto the old steamers
Mm-hmm.
and towed them. And it stayed upright because it was held in place by the old horse hook, and they only had two wheels on them, two drive wheels. But they would take that to the fire,
Uh-huh.
and it pulled. Another guy told me about where they still had one of those operating, and what they did was when they backed the wagon in
Mm-hmm.
to keep steam up, they had a gas jet
Mm-hmm.
that took over and heated the water when it was sitting in the firehouse.
Yeah. But back to Terra Linda. The air raid siren, as I recall, you would have an official test of it, quote unquote, at noon on Saturday every week.
Probably.
I remember that was one of the things you could use to orient yourself for time, as little kids did not wear watches.
Well, it was
when I
either
was a
that
kid.
or Tuesday, because
No,
I
it was
think
Saturday at noon. We could count on it. But you said to me once that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you guys did not run the siren.
We wouldn't run the siren because
it was also
everybody
an air
was a
raid.
little touchy. Was about 5 days long. And I think on the Friday, or maybe it was a Monday, I just remember I was instructed to turn my radio on. There was always resentment about the fact that I carried a radio.
A transistor radio.
That you're getting away with something.
While you worked in the phone company?
Yeah. And when I was on nights, I'd listen to it. But it was in my pocket always. And when Kennedy got killed and a management person would rush over to me and say,
Turn on your radio. Yeah. Well, actually, this is unrelated to the phone company. I mean, unrelated to the Terra Linda Fire Department, but related to the phone company. How did the people in the building at the phone company, without televisions and without radios, find out that Kennedy was assassinated? You've told me this story.
Well, whenever you had a big problem,
An event in the news or
yeah,
whatever.
remember I've told you that only 16 people out of 100 could get
Dial tone.
dial tone. Now that 100 would be multiplied in a couple of other units. So
Yeah, because only 16 people are going to lift up their
Yeah,
phone at any given
but
moment
what
in time.
I meant was that
At
it
that point.
didn't mean you might get 25 because the next unit picked up but if it was full, everything was full. And there was 2 ways that offices, actually there was 3 ways, but anyhow, the middle office was what they called I'm trying to think of what, wasn't a step office, but what would happen is you had this big thing that looked like a radiator. It wasn't, was contact, but you had, I presume, the 16 rods on that. I wasn't a switchman. And they would go up and make a connection for a phone call. You took your phone off the hook and it would run up.
And make another connection for something else.
And then you dial and then it would come to a number or would send you to another office or whatever it would do.
All these mechanical switches.
And if you got, say, the cable down Del Ganado got wet, but not wet enough to hold, because it didn't make a good connection, you'd go down in the switch room and these rods would be going up and down. They'd try and hold, but they wouldn't hold.
Because they've
And you
shorted out electrical
they called
connection.
that trying to think.
Wave.
No, it was like a rainbow or a rainfall, and so it would do that. But if something happened, like a big earthquake, or
Kennedy being
or
killed.
a big thing on the news, everybody would call everybody, and the whole office would go up. And then those
And it would
first
lock.
people would get dial tone, but the rest of the office couldn't get anybody.
The whole of the step office, everybody
Yeah.
would move at once, and all the
And all the other offices, their little boxes that did the same thing rotated and went to someplace. Because everybody wanted to find out from Aunt Louise, was she all right? Now, Kennedy got killed
In Dallas.
in Dallas, but everybody in San
Saw it on the news, and so everybody is phoning everybody about it.
Yeah, and so the whole office hung up.
And
And-
they wouldn't know what had caused it, but they'd know something important had
They
just
knew
happened.
that I had a phone.
You had a
I
radio.
mean, a radio. And they'd call upstairs to the test board and say, something just happened. Find out what it was, because it also could be a cable getting cut. And so I'd turn on the radio and I'd find out what. But that's how, when Kennedy got killed, and then I went out to lunch and stood by the news rack across the street and listened to my radio, and they gave the news, and they kind of hinted by the time I got back in an hour later that he was dead.
Well,
But it wasn't
it's sort of
official.
interesting, is, I mean, you were in a big office at the phone company, but you were a very early adopter on things like transistor radios. You paid very high premiums for interesting gadgets, like a calculator. I remember when
That was
would have been an
$100.
insane amount of money. You paid $400 for a calculator.
No, 100.
I remember it as more than that, but maybe I'm confusing it with the SX70. But whatever, you
I
got a lot
paid
of
a lot of
early
money.
gadgets,
I
and so
paid
you're the
about
one guy in the whole of the phone company building, many of whom are people being paid more than you, because you're the one with the transistor radio that you keep in your pocket.
Well,
And so that's the way the phone company figured out that it hadn't been a cable that got cut.
that's how, and the funny thing was, the vice president was in the building. And I've never seen a guy get out of the building as fast. Because when the office hung up like that, somebody has to write a letter
To the head of the phone company explaining why it went.
explaining what happened. Why, because we're out of business.
Yeah,
And-
nobody can pick up a phone and do anything. That's why
There's
you
a
can't
switch-
get dial tone when there's an emergency.
There's a switch you throw, and then emergency calls only. Like the last line on the Emporium's switchboard would work, but none of the others would. So they could call out for an ambulance. And doctors and so on, there's a pecking order. But nobody wants to throw that switch, because if you throw that switch, that's another letter. And that would go to the chairman. And the vice president of Pacific Bell was in the building.
And
when it
decided he
happened.
didn't want to be the one who got
He
stuck to
didn't
write
want
the
to
letter.
be the senior guy. You know how whenever anything goes wrong, it's the chief clerk or something that
Yeah.
gets hung for it.
Yes, it's never the head of Wells Fargo. It's the lower level minion that got pushed into it who's actually gets the knife. Yes, I do know.
Well, that's,
I'm going to pause again.
but he was out of the building like somebody grabbed a bar of soap.
Okay, I'm going to pause again. Okay, let's see. I have on notes.
Oh, and we moved the siren across the street when,
The firehouse got built.
well, the original one slot firehouse was built by Eichler and given to the district.
Mm-hmm.
And they put a roof on it for a second slot.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who then owned, I think, and is why the name is Bill, Bill's Bicycle in San Rafael.
I don't know, but I know that there Mike's Bikes
Mike's Bike.
in San Rafael. I think it's Mike's Bikes in San
It
Rafael.
may be. We bought the two bikes from them. The two, what do you call them? The two twins are from there. And he he had all us stupid people working for him, but he built the second side.
Because he had been a contractor
I
or
don't know. He
a carpenter
was
or
an
something.
expert carpenter,
Uh-huh.
and he put the side wall down,
And so
the back wall
the
down,
second.
and arranged to pour the cement,
Mm-hmm.
and made it into a two-car thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the flaws was that Eichler put in a big door that flipped up,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so big and the like, it could jam.
Oh.
And so we had an axe there to break it loose and then just drive over it and drive out. We never had to do that, but you sometimes had to work a little to get it open. And we put the siren, I think, on the left side, and then we put some tilt boards on the left so we could drain our hoses when they got wet. Most old firehouses had a tower on, and the tower is to hoist your hoses in and let them drain, because water, when it mixes with rubber, makes sulfuric acid, and that eats the rubber out of the hose. And the old hoses, before they had nylon, were made of cotton, and the outside rotted from just being wet and the like. So if you look at old firehouses in San Francisco,
There's always a tower.
there's a tower, and you have a thing you hook 4 or 5 hoses on there and pull it up, and
So
it's
that they can
50
drain
feet
out.
long, and they drain pretty fast. But most firehouses don't do that any. One, they have nylon hoses, and so they put boards,
Sideways racks on the
the
side.
racks along the side that are 50 feet long, and you lay your hoses on there and they drain out.
Had me write down the skunk who died.
Oh, okay.
Story of the skunk who died.
Down here at the bottom of the block,
Where Beechnut Court crosses Las Ovejas.
yeah, there's one of the houses there. A lady called on a Saturday, and I came up, and I had the old number 1. And she told me a sad story about, I forget whether it was a skunk or some other kind of wild something had died in her backyard.
Uh-huh.
And she told me that nobody would do anything for her.
For how you get rid of the dead skunk.
How do you get rid of the dead skunk? She had called the sheriff's office, because we weren't under the San Rafael police at that time.
Mm-hmm.
She called the sheriff's office, and they told her to go to the, what do you call it? The,
Community Services
no, who comes out when you have a dying animal?
District? Animal control?
Yeah, animal control. And they told her it's on private property, it's your problem. And
Uh-huh.
she didn't want to mess with it. Now, one of the easy
highway
ways
patrol.
would be just pick it up and put it in
The street. and then-
garbage, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was a skunk or something, but she wasn't much sold on that idea, and she wanted, when
Somebody-
everything else failed, you went to the fire department. So I said, well, what happened? She said, well, the skunk was already dead, and they wouldn't take it away. And I said, well, let's think about that. And I got the McLeod rake off the back of the engine,
Mhm.
which is a thing that it's for going into where you have fire and you're trying to put it out. And it's a big, heavy thing. And I hooked the skunk and I dragged him out to the middle of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, now you call
The
the
highway.
SPCA back
Uh-huh.
and you tell him he came to life and he staggered out into the middle of and he died. And Captain Maginnis from the fire department was with you at the time.
Witness
And
this
if they
amazing-
wanted to check, go down to the firehouse. And he was on city property then, or county property. And I said, he just, and so they came out and they took him away.
Dead skunk.
But he got just enough, and he staggered out onto the street, and he dropped dead there.
Okay.
So that was the skunk story.
Let's see. There's.
One time somebody asked us down here on this street, this guy he sold his house, and he had been building a yacht, and he needed to get it across the street because he sold it to the guy across the street. And so he came to the firehouse on a Saturday morning, and there's 20 guys standing there ready to do some drill. And he said, can I borrow you? And we went up and carried the yacht across the street. Anything that came up, we got stuck with it. And I finally put my foot down about something, and I know I was held to be sort of an SOB about it. They then decided, as the only organized group, we should hold the parade for all the little kiddies on Halloween. And I objected. I said, we're firemen. We put in at least one day a week and a couple of nights, and any fires that come up. and we're gathered together to be firemen. If you have kids, how about the parents doing it? It would be maybe half the fire department, but I didn't think we should be doing it. But I was held to be kind of a hard nose about that, but we didn't do it. It went back to the parents to do.
Well, what's interesting is I ran into an article on that topic where it says there was somebody doing a letter to the editor of, gee, we should be able to get this children's parade thing to happen. And apparently the fire department did agree to do the lighting for the parade, as it was a nighttime parade. And you guys had agreed to go and provide the lighting and, you know,
Well, they
setting
wanted us
up
to organize it
and
hurdle the
you
kids.
guys basically said, yeah, well, the kid herding should be with the parents who were doing the herding, and the parents wouldn't do it. And so some lady wrote an irate letter to the paper about the wimpiness of the parents, basically, that you guys had already agreed to do some stuff for it, you just weren't game to do all of it.
Now, I can remember one parade we had, and it was all the kids and the Boy Scouts were in it. And I can remember Bill Follett, because he was assistant scoutmaster or the scoutmaster, herding young Bill along. But that was run by them. They tended to have parades that went by the firehouse and down that piece of street and around to the grocery store. I don't know whether you were, if you were around, you were pretty small.
Well, no, there were like little bits of the parade going on with the beginning of the fire department, and that was or one that had the Las Galinas Valley Sanitary District Non-Marching Band, which at that time was the Just for Fun Galinas Sanitary District Non-Marching Band.
Yeah,
at that point.
And they only would go if you could get them
In a truck. Yeah, they were in a truck, and the new fire engine and the new firehouse opening was done at Scotty's, and that's all detailed in the IJ. But that happened literally. That you guys got the engine and had this event on either side of my being born, just by a few weeks. So
yeah, well, it was just the pickup.
Yeah. And one of the things actually that I thought might be interesting to go through is Mom kept a desk calendar of what was going on. Let's see if I can find this.
Well, I was down at the firehouse a lot.
Yes, you were. What was going on with all that? And what she was doing with the auxiliary that raised money for stuff for the year of 1959, which is when that happened. So like 1958 is when that fire happened and you guys got the first engine and you formed. But 59 was when you got the second engine, built the firehouse, had the firehouse opening, brought the engine up to the firehouse for the opening, and did your first year of doing lots of training and that and the other thing. And you were simultaneously going and doing Marine Corps stuff.
Yeah.
As a member of the reserve. And Mom was busy dealing with me as a new baby, plus doing a lot of stuff in the auxiliary to try and raise money for resuscitators and spaghetti feeds and different things that would raise money to...
Well, they had this dance was the main way we raised the money. And But
Yeah.
it cost a lot for those days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was almost $400, I think. And when we got finished with it,
You
it
had
was
more.
$500.
Mm-hmm. But you raised more money than you needed for the
Yeah,
thing,
I think
you
so.
got a little extra out of it. So,
And
I've
the
got-
district, I remember going to an early district meeting,
Mhm.
and it amused me because they argued a whole night plus a couple hours. You know, it was supposed to be like a 4-hour meeting,
Mhm.
and it was 4 hours plus another hour or so.
Mhm.
And it was about buying a box of envelopes and some writing paper with their stamp on it. And later on, we were buying fire engines, we were paying for plantings
Mhm.
and all sorts of stuff. But I remember that argument about, well, whether they should get the writing paper with what on it and from which stationery company. They got a couple of bids. And it was a couple of packages of writing paper and a box of envelopes.
Mhm.
And that was it. But because I used to go to those too.
Mhm. The CSD meetings
Yeah.
that dealt with money.
And then we'd have a meeting before that so we know what we would push for and all.
Mhm.
And I remember one guy giving me a hard time because I kept up on the supplies and we had said we need this and we need it, we need that. And he said, you know, we don't have the money and so on. And this was after the meeting.
Mhm.
And I don't know, you guys keep naming things. And I said, I'm a fireman.
Mhm.
If I don't tell you what we need,
Mhm.
you're going to come back when we need it and say, why didn't you tell us?
Mhm.
I said, that's my job. Your job is where you get the money and what you spend it on.
Mhm.
But that's your job. I just have to tell you that we need this and we need that.
Mhm. Well, I have also found out I am wrong. It is not Mike's Bikes. It is Herb's Hobby and Bike Shop, 1611 4th Street, San Rafael. I took photos of the part of your bicycles downstairs
That have the sticker?
that have the Terra Linda CSD bicycle license, which was some fundraising thing that happened in 1968. Is you set up bicycle licenses, and I've got the little paperwork for
Well,
leave this card in the envelope and put away in a safe place. If you sell or exchange your bicycle, report the fact to the fire department by filling in the information, etc. Now, what's unusual is I did have my bike stolen, and it because of that sticker. When the remains of my bicycle were found, that is to say, the frame with the back wheel and a bunch of tire tied around it. My bicycle wasn't just stolen, it was like seriously abused, sabotaged, and dismembered, and then stuck down a storm drain where the storm drain stuff did more to it. Which leads me to believe that the time when I went down the hill and had no brakes suddenly, and that perhaps that was not an accidental occurrence, There were
Well,
people out to get me.
when I
Uh,
was,
Just because you are paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. I
Right.
kind of got that impression in grade school,
uh,
but it would mean.
when I was little, a lot of towns, San Francisco did, but I remember Alameda did and Fresno did.
Mm-hmm.
They had license plates.
Mm-hmm. This is just a little sticker on
Yeah.
the
Well,
frame of the bike. But-
Up to World War II, there wasn't plastic stickers.
Mm-hmm.
Things were made out of
Metal,
stuff.
yeah.
And so you got a little license plate each year that you had to put on your bike, and you could get a ticket if you didn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing them in Fresno and in Alameda County. San Francisco never bothered with them.
Mm-hmm.
It was your business.
But yeah, so in 1968 is when you guys got license stickers.
But a lot of small towns tended to do that kind of things because it was a way of raising money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's see, other things that I've got listed. There's the kerfuffle with the San Rafael fire chief that I've written about a whole bunch, which I should ask you about, but I think I'll do that
Well,
one
I
later.
didn't know too much about that. That was more,
That was in 65, I think.
yeah, that
Or
was
67,
more,
7, whatever.
uh,
That was later.
it was more the chief's problem.
Mm-hmm. However, I thought I would ask you to detail how, when I was in kindergarten at the age of 6, I was driving on the, riding on the back of the fire engine part of the time.
Well,
Not too often.
once a year, we would have all the kids
Yes.
go on the engine. But when
I remember
I
that.
switched to nights,
Mm-hmm.
I had you all morning
Mm-hmm. While Mom was off
while
in San
Mom
Francisco.
was away, and you went to you went to
Afternoon
school in
kindergarten.
the afternoon.
Afternoon kindergarten. Yeah, when I was 6.
And if by that time, I think we had gotten the big engine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go down to the firehouse if there was a call out,
Mm-hmm.
climb up in the engine,
Mm-hmm.
and put you behind my seat, and you'd
Mhm.
hold on to my
Mhm.
seat,
Mhm.
because we never went fast anyplace.
Mhm.
I remember the lady who wouldn't get on the crosswalk.
Mhm.
One time we got down about the intersection, I think past the church,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure. There's an intersection down there. And she was walking across, and we're coming along, the sirens going like
Mhm.
crazy, and she's just walking across the intersection because we didn't know where we. So that's when I decided I had found the thing that moved people,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't the siren.
Was
I
the
hit the horn, and
Mhm.
it fluttered her trousers. She was right in front of it, and she moved after that. And we swung and went up that street, but she just wouldn't. She was walking, I think a kid too. And we came to a complete stop and were waiting there for her to cross the intersection. And we were officially going to a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took my foot and I hit the air horn.
And that got her attention sufficient that she. And
Well,
her
she
kid-
must have been right in line, because I remember watching her slacks do this.
Mhm.
from the air horn.
Mm-hmm.
And I found from then on, I we set the siren on, but we used the air horn because people would listen to that
Mm-hmm.
and get out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, the only recollection I really have of that was being behind you in the thing and being sort of scared at being up so high. But the other thing I remember was we'd get to the fire, and of course I would have to stay in the truck because
Right.
I was not a fireman. I was a 6 to 7 year old. This would have been in 1965, I
And
think.
you would sit in my seat or
And yeah,
Look around
I'd sit
it.
there and I'd watch, and it was all fairly dull, mostly watching people come in and out with hoses, and then afterwards putting together the hoses. It was just a lot of watching hoses and being bored out of my mind, but at the same time having the sensation that something really exciting was going on just around the corner that I couldn't see.
yeah, because you couldn't see the back.
Yeah, yeah. So I remember one of those up on I don't know what the name of the street is, but near where the Dottos
But
lived.
I didn't know what to do with you
Yeah.
because
If you were
I
injured.
left you home and I was injured, nobody'd know you were here.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
So that's what you rode in style.
Yes.
I remember I was called for jury duty.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in and I said I couldn't do it. In those days, if you were a fireman or anything like that, you got exempt. Amongst other things, they knew you wouldn't get called because about 2/3 of the cases were between the city and somebody, and you were considered
City
a city employee, and so they'd throw you off. And but they said no, everybody's got to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And I said I took care of you
Mm-hmm.
in the morning, and I was a fireman. And the guy said, well, what do you, I said, so I can't come. And he said, well, what do you do with her when there's a fire? And I said, she goes to the fire with me on my lap. Do you want me to have her sit on my lap during the jury serving? And he went,
I was well behaved and quiet. It would have been fine.
oh, no, jury duty was, you would have died.
I'm sure I would have died of boredom, but I used to go with mothers' meetings in San Francisco to
But I
stuff.
said, you know, she
I
can
had-
sit on my lap like she does when I go to a fire. You nitwit. So he signed it off at that point.
Yep. And it was just for the 1 year, because from that point on, I went to school pretty soon after.
In the morning, yeah.
And for a full day from first grade on. And then you'd get Nanny and Grandpa to come take care of me when I came home from school. But that was sort of interesting. I'm gonna stop and start.
You know, I kind of, I enjoyed jury duty
Mm-hmm.
in many cases. Although I used to be amused, they always picked us because phone company people were kind of considered to be dolts, and most lawyers put us on the jury because they figured they could convince us of anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember the time in San Francisco when I was working for Standard Oil in those days, and I got nailed for jury duty.
Mm-hmm.
and they asked, did any of us on the jury know any of the detective department?
Mm-hmm.
And I said that I had, but he wasn't a detective anymore. And so the defense lawyer figured I'd had a friend bounced off the police, so he was eager for me to be on jury. So he asked me who it was, and I said, he was promoted, he's deputy chief now, and my father was godfather to one of his kids. He had triplets, I think, or something like that. Two girls, or two girls and a boy. And I named the chief. I never got thrown off a jury as fast as that. Right then, boom. Another time here, when we moved to San Rafael, I was called for jury duty, and I got seated, and the assistant district attorney said, you know, you're known to me, would you explain to the judge and the other lawyer how we're known? And I said, I'm first sergeant in an outfit, a Marine outfit, and he is one of the company commanders. And I think I was sergeant major at that point. And they said, well, would it influence you? And I said, no. And they said, well, I mean, you know. And I said, I'm sergeant major. He's just a captain in one of the companies. I'm not.
You don't have much contact with him.
Well, no, not that, but I had contact with him, but he couldn't influence me because that was my job. I was the colonel's surrogate, and but the other lawyer decided I should take the rest of the day off.
Okay. I'm pausing again. I'm gonna do this, which is Mom's desk calendar that she had for the year 1959. Because she took notes on everything, because she was staying at home, because she was about to give birth to me in January of 1959.
She sure kept notes on you.
Yes, she did. I have ones for the couple of years, which are, you know, what words I learned each day and all that. However, the first year, 59, doesn't have much of that, but it has a lot about the fire department and the CSD and things like that. So I have here Sunday, January 4th, 8:30 to 12, Leo to Menlo Park Fire Department.
That's to get engine.
The 1942 La France, number 2. And receive translation morning to buy 1942 La France engine and receive instruction in operation of the engine. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Anything else you can think about that when you went down to Menlo
Well, I
Park?
told you the only thing I learned was, and that's a nice fire station, but they just had run out of room. It wasn't even in the fire station. It was in a barn.
But it was a pretty good engine.
It ran.
It had developed a thing that meant it couldn't really be taken on the highway much.
Well, they could have paid to have it done, but it was an old engine, a 41. When you have 4 or 5 engines, You don't need a 41.
Yeah.
We didn't have any.
Elsewhere it's listed as being a 1942 engine, but I don't know which of those
Well,
is correct.
I had always heard 41, but probably 42, which would have been the start of the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was all, there was no fancy, there was no power brakes,
Mm-hmm.
there was no power steering.
Mm-hmm.
I had grown up with Model A's so I could keep the door closed because it had a long H
Mm-hmm.
rack
Mm-hmm.
that the engine was on. And so the front end was going out over the street while the back end was straight.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing was going like that. And the door would swing open. So I'd ride with my arm.
You use your
out.
arm to hold the door in rather than the
Right.
door holding you in. Did it at least have seat belts?
No.
Oh, God. That's the one that would have had the embarrassing moment where the guy fell off the back one time.
No, that was the
That was the little
pickup.
truck? The number one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was on the corner right as you go from Del Ganado on to Freitas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then Monday, January 5th, the next day, fire meeting. You had me write down translation night, probably a meeting at the new firehouse. Tuesday, January 6th, CSD meeting, the Community Services District meeting. Translation night at the Terra Linda Community Center. Saturday, January 10th, Leo Drill Fire Department. And then Friday, January 23rd, Leo Fire Meeting.
Yeah, well, we would have a night meeting at Fire to know what we were going to say at the, and that's why I know about the Brown Act,
Mm-hmm.
which they hadn't tightened up on completely. So what we would have was what the district had. You weren't allowed to have a meeting without the public being there.
Mm-hmm.
So what you did was you closed up your meeting and set a meeting for the next night, or maybe before the meeting then, which was a committee of the whole,
Mm-hmm.
which just did away with the whole idea of the Brown Act.
Yes.
It wasn't the mayor of San Francisco, or in those days, the head of the legislature, but there was another guy by the name of Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And he passed this bill that said,
You have to have open meetings.
yeah, but you could have committee meetings in private.
Mm-hmm.
So you would make a committee of
Of
the
the
whole.
So that you can have a private meeting and get around the law. So around the same time as all this, the CSD meeting and fire meeting, there's an article in the IJ from January 7th, 1959, in which the IJ indicates that the Terra Lindens get a fire truck. The Terra Linda Community Service District yesterday, that would be the 6th of January, obtained delivery of its long-awaited second fire truck, a 750-gallon-per-minute pumper secured from the Menlo Park Fire Department under a lease purchase agreement arranged by the First National Bank in San Rafael. William Adams, Terra Linda volunteer fireman, drove the truck from Menlo Park. After getting a paint job, it will be kept in the district's nearly completed firehouse on Del Ganado Road. The station will be dedicated at a ceremony on January 18th. The new truck, a 1942 La France, and related fire equipment will cost the district
The new truck.
Yes. Will cost the district $4,998. A group of volunteers went to Menlo Park on Sunday to receive instruction in operation of the heavy rig. It will supplement the district's 250-gallon per minute pumper. Noting that Terra Linda Oaks Unit 9, a new subdivision south of Manuel T. Freitas Parkway, is beyond district boundaries, directors instructed General Manager Jack Brandon to ask the County Council's office if the district legally could furnish the tract with fire protection, and other matters of the district board, etc. So that's going on at the same time as these meetings. So Saturday, January 10th, Leo drill fire department. And then also, I've got a thing on January 13th, 1959, now opening in Terra Linda, Cook Hale Hardware, Terra Linda Shopping Center. Watch for grand opening soon. Will be open on Sunday, and weekdays from 9 to 6 p.m. Come in tomorrow. So Cook's Hardware was announcing that it was opening just as you guys were getting ready to finish the firehouse the last few days of that.
We had these big buildings to take care of.
Yes, and so
your mother used to push you down in your buggy and look in the window of the grocery store.
Yes. I remember all sorts of things about Scotty's and so on, and
they
Cook's.
had Cook's.
I didn't know it was Cook Hale to begin with, but it was
Yeah,
Cook's
well,
Hardware when I was.
They were partners
And
from
I
the
gathered-
plumbing business, I think, and then Hale got out of it.
But basically, so just a little before the fire station is opening, Tuesday, January 13th, they're saying now open in Terra Linda. That Cook's Hardware opened, and Cook was knowledgeable in plumbing, carpentry, and not only sold supplies,
Which
but
is what you needed in a
yes,
hardware.
essentially tutored the Terra Linda homeowners in how to repair things, and you guys in how to get your firehouse put together. So that
He was very good, and that's why he was successful.
yes,
There also was a 5 and 10 that went in there. And there was
yes,
a
the
full
variety store.
pharmacy.
Yes, I'm trying to remember what the name of the pharmacy was. We just called it the pharmacy.
Yeah, but
I remember.
he never caught on. He was the worst pharmacist. In the
It
meantime,
was sort of big in, as I recall.
well, it was the whole far end where the kids do gym stuff. That was the pharmacy.
Yes, that's now Taekwondo place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to go in there and read comic books and
But he
occasionally
had no
buy them.
personality.
Yeah. Well,
And
the guy who ran the variety store was very anti-kids. Now,
Yeah.
the fact that the kids were busy doing a lot of shoplifting would kind of cause that, but.
Well, Mendy had
So
the
I remember
right
I was
product.
really kind of annoyed. I went in once with a friend of mine, and when I got out, I discovered that she'd managed to steal something. And I liked going there. I didn't want to be persona non grata at the variety store. So I was very upset with her over that.
And there was, I think there was, wasn't there closer to the hardware store, there was a pizza place or
The pizza place went in where the variety store, when the variety store closed. It still is. I want to call La Coco's something. We've never actually gone there, though. I've heard it's a good
it's
pizza
the
place.
best. Was always, everybody told me it was the best of whatever they were selling, but
Well,
the
we
best.
should go, because now that you understand that it's possible to get pizza that does not involve tomato sauce, we can eat pizza.
Well, it's only so much because
Yeah, I know, you can't do that much in the way of bread. without
no,
having
it's
trouble.
it's the bread and it's also
The cheese?
Other, it upsets
Oh, you've now been having trouble with that. Okay.
No, I can get
a slice, but
I'm
not
a
a
slice
single
man.
sliced person. Yeah, it's hard being a single sliced person when you want it without tomato sauce. I myself have that
Yes,
problem.
That's
But then I don't usually just want a single slice. Now, let's see, January 16th, Friday, January 16th in the IJ, we have a picture of the La France engine and the opening of the firehouse with Flaherty in his white hat on the engine and some guy standing in front of it. And it says, ready for dedication, Richard R. Flaherty, Terra Linda Fire Chief, sits in Terra Linda Community Service District's 750-gallon per minute pumper truck at the district's firehouse, recently completed by volunteer labor. In foreground is William G. Adams, equipment chairman for the district. The firehouse will be dedicated Sunday. Independent Journal photo. And that is an image that goes over the article. Terra Linda is on the march with Firehouse Dedication Parade, which is in very tiny letters in my printout. And I will read portions to you and you will make comments. Terra Linda residents will dedicate their community's new firehouse Sunday. Sunday. Trying to figure out when, 10th, which would be this.
well, it's on the page before, isn't it?
I'm not sure if it's Sunday or. Oh, the dedication is on Sunday, which would have been January 18th. So January 18th, but this is telling you what's going to happen on the 16th.
And
2 days
Sunday
before.
was when
So
I
this
had
is
to
in the
go to
Friday
the Marine
paper.
Corps. So
Okay.
probably,
I don't know if you were there.
yeah, I
Let's see.
don't remember.
Hold on. So this is in the Friday paper before Sunday, the 18th of January. Terra Linda residents will dedicate their community's new firehouse Sunday in ceremonies commencing at 1:30 p.m. Festivities will get underway with a parade which will form on Manuel T. Freitas Parkway and wind along Del Ganado and Las Ovejas roads to the firehouse. Units in the parade will be the community's 2 fire engines, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Mariners, the Cub Scouts, the Brownies, the Campfire Girls, and Bluebirds. Music will be furnished by the Las Colinas Valley Sanitary District Non-Marching Band, which will ride aboard a flatbed truck. Also in the parade will be 5 decorated automobiles bearing members of the Terra Linda Drama Group, the Terra Linda Teen Club, and children of the Community Nursery School. Lieutenant Colonel Lyman Woodman will be parade marshal. Mrs. George Lindholm, wife of a volunteer fireman who was seriously injured some weeks ago while answering a fire call. I think he's the guy who fell off the truck
Yes.
and was in the hospital. Will cut the ribbon to mark the official opening of the firehouse. Speakers will include Walter B. R. Castro, Chairman of the County Board of Supervisors,
Yes.
Mrs. Mary Summers, County Planning Director, John P. Name, President of the Terra Linda Community Services District, and Elmer Johnson, Terra Linda Fire Commissioner. The Reverend Dale Cooper of Christ Presbyterian Church, who is one of the firemen, Terra Linda, and Reverend Elmer F. Mully of Resurrection Lutheran Church, Terra Linda, will give the invocation and benediction. Boy Scouts of the community will present funds collected in their recent bicycle sale to a representative of the Terra Linda Volunteer Firemen's Association to be placed in a benefit fund for injured firemen and needy persons in the community administered by the association. The firehouse was built at a cost of about $2,000 with much of the labor and materials donated by contractors, merchants, and residents of Terra Linda. In a sidebar, this is next to a big ad that says, Terra Linda, Marin's most progressive community, takes pleasure in announcing the dedication of their first public building, the Terra Linda Firehouse, on Sunday, January 18, 1959. We of Terra Linda wish to acknowledge with grateful appreciation the cooperation of the following firms and individuals without whose assistance and generosity this firehouse could not be been built. Architect, Norrin Elliott. Builder, Eichler Homes. Concrete, Chicotte and Sons. Electric, Jones Electric. Forms, PJ Tarrant Construction,
They were all,
poured concrete
yeah,
forming.
they
yeah.
were all indebted to Eichler.
Yes. Glazing, WP Fuller Company, grading, EA Ford and Company, paint, Ayers Paints, plumbing, Curry Heating and Plumbing, roof, Paramount Roofing, sheet metal, BB Stern, trenching, F. Clementino, and members of the Terra Linda Volunteer Fire Department.
We
In addition-
painted the old place.
Yes, in addition, we would like to acknowledge the cooperation received from the following county offices and the individuals associated with them: the Board of Supervisors, the County Council's Office, the Department of Public Works Planning Commission. We are proud of the privilege of serving Marin's most progressive community, the officers of the Terra Linda Community Services District. So that's sort of a sidebar, is this big ad thanking Eichler and his attendant contractors for having built the firehouse. Let's see, where was I?
Well, and prior to that, to get the place going, the original school is the rec building.
Yes, the rec building, so Eichler built the rec building as a sort of temporary school till
Well,
we
if he was
built up
selling
schools.
houses,
Yeah,
where are the kids
We're
going to go
going,
to
exactly.
school? So he
And
built 4 classrooms, I think.
Uh-huh. And the rec building, it's interesting that it was built with this new crazy idea of having partition walls that you could move around. And so it was
You could
like
make
3
it one
classrooms or
room
one
or-
big room.
Yeah.
And I remember a lot of times finding that very vaguely disorienting as a kid, because you'd go in and it was different size rooms at different times.
Yeah, but it was very in at
Yeah.
the time.
Oh, and it was entirely practical. It still is. It's still in working order and being used that way, and is a great cheap thing to rent and do for events.
Oh, you might put down that what we got as pay was after the pool got going. We got a family membership every year.
To the
To the-
pool and recreation.
Yeah,
hall.
which a lot of us had pool, but it was nice to have our kids be able to go with the other kids.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see, so one of the perks of that. Let's see. At present, I'm continuing with the article, the firehouse. At present, it consists of a building to provide enclosed shelter for one fire engine and a carport for partial shelter for the second engine. Now, you were saying that you guys then took that carport and built it into a
That's
full
where
second
the second,
slot.
so,
And that's where Herb of the bike shop, who was a carpenter,
right.
told you guys how to put that together.
Well, he did most of the work. We
Mhm.
did the painting, and
Mhm.
it's also where I took my, on my uniform, the Red Cross.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, we took a ring chop from the phone company, had the right to teach us all to be instructors.
At CPR?
Yeah, for the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be moved down to your sleeve, but
Okay. Ultimately, the building will be expanded to provide enclosed shelter for both engines. Terra Linda's Fire Protection Service is an operation of the Terra Linda Community Services District, with firefighting done by 20 active and 6 associate volunteer firemen. Arrangements for Sunday's program have been made by Mamie Johnson, Fire Commissioner, Jack Walsh, Planning Commissioner, and Jack Brandon, General Manager of the Services District. The Terra Linda Community Services District, which operates the community's fire protection service, came into being in April 1957. The fire department started last spring, that's to say in 1958, when directors of the district voted to purchase Terra Linda's first fire engine for $5,500. Later in the year, the second engine was acquired. In September, district directors gave the go-ahead to plans for the firehouse. Building plans were drawn and donated by Don R. Knorr, San Francisco architect and Terra Linda resident.
Well, that gives you some idea what the number 2 engine was worth.
Yeah, so it cost less than your pickup truck one.
And the pickup trucks, in those days, you bought a pickup truck, it was $1,500 or less.
Yeah, and
then
but-
all the stuff we put on it.
made it cost considerably more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all
well, and
the-
I would assume that most fireplaces, most districts wouldn't have been able to use the particular engine that you got as number 2 because they would have had to have gone faster than 35 miles an hour. But the entire district that you covered
Yeah.
was
It
the
was
highest
ideal for
speed. The
us.
highest speed that you were allowed to go was 35 miles an hour. So,
And all we were doing was pulling a much better pump into place. And you know what we use the pump for here?
I do, but I think you should tell the camera.
Well, for one thing, we had very good water pressure most of the time.
And I'm going to.
And so we mainly used, especially if it was on the valley of the district, we used the pumper to slow down.
And I'm going to
the-
go and show them why. So when you see here, up on the hill, way up on the hill, is a water tower. Actually, several water towers. There's one over here, and one over there.
There was
But
one flaw.
They're up pretty high, with the result that the water pressure
And I think there's one back
is
this way.
so
someplace.
strong. Oop.
But
Let's get this
there
back
was
into.
there was 2 flaws with it.
Mhm.
One, there was the tanks didn't have an automatic flow. Somebody had to fill them up, and that meant that a guy drove around with a truck, looked at how high the tank was full, and turned on a valve and filled it up and then shut it off. And that meant on the weekends, it was a little dicey. Then there was the drilling of the pipes.
Explain, but-
On Delganado, they decided to fence, at our advice, to fence the
the canal,
ditch.
the ditch.
And they originally were gonna put in a tall fence, and we said you're out of your mind, 'cause kids will figure out a way to
And it'll be harder
get
to get them
over
back
it, and
out.
it'll be hard to get anybody out of it. So it was just gonna be,
Enough to discourage small children from going
Right.
in, but not enough to prevent the bigger children from getting in and you getting them back out again when they
Yeah.
manage to do something stupid.
so they hired some guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he decided that the way to do it was to go every so many feet and drill a hole along the
So he
edge,
proceeded
and
to
then
drill
back
holes
down
in
the
your-
other side.
into the water.
Well, the
Pipes.
water main came up on one side of that ditch, and everybody had a pipe that went across to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And he managed to hit every one of those pipes going up the ditch. And so for a little while, we had this little sprinkler system that shot up. But after that, it got kind of, we ran out of water. And we had what was in the engines, that was about 200 gallons in each engine. And the closest water we had was for the county. They had a tanker truck
Mm-hmm.
that they could bring over from San Anselmo, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
if we needed water, but they didn't want to do it unless we needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day they capped all the pipes going up.
I think there's a thing in the IJ on that too. I'll sort of cut it in and reference it. I just don't remember.
But
what
it was a
day that was.
wizard.
I think Flaherty slept at the firehouse on the truck that night on the theory that they needed to be able to get to things faster.
The idea was to get
And-
fires out quick because there
Uh-huh.
wasn't that much water.
Mhm.
The whole district was low on water at that point.
Okay. So, Monday, January 19th, the IJ reports on the parade, the
festivity.
festivities. And it says, 1,000 Terra Linda see firehouse rights. It sounds from the number of Girl Scouts but
Well,
there's 1,000
all
just in
in
the
all,
parade.
there was only
about
about
1,000 Terra Lindens,
it's
period.
everybody, Mr. and Mrs. came down.
Well, you know, what else is there to do in Terra Linda?
And-
There was no park.
Well, and all the kids, their parents
There was
came.
nothing to do. More than 1,000 Terra Linda residents, including several hundred children, turned out yesterday for the dedication of their community's new firehouse on Delgado Road. The festivities included a parade, music by the Las Galinas Valley Sanitary District non-marching band, and oratory by officials of Marin County and the Terra Linda Community
Oh, they were
Services
great
District.
at oratory.
Yes. Official opening of the firehouse was marked by a ribbon-cutting ceremony led by Mrs. George Lindholm, wife of a volunteer fireman who was injured last fall while answering a fire call. Speakers were Walter R. Castro, Chairman of the County Board of Supervisors, Mrs. Mary Summers, County Planning Director, John P. Namoy, President of the Services District, and Elmer Johnson, Terra Linda Fire Commissioner. Blessings given. The invocation was given by Reverend Dale
Elmer
Cooper.
Johnson was a nice guy. They mentioned an equipment guy, and I think he was the one that I really couldn't stand because he was an authority. He
On
was
bean counting.
say no more, I'm an expert.
Uh-huh. Well,
But he
plus-
never did much.
Yeah. The invocation was given by Reverend Dale Cooper of Christ Presbyterian Church, Terra Linda, and the benediction by Reverend Elmer F. Mully of Resurrection Lutheran Church, Terra Linda.
That's
Pretty
it.
much all the stuff that they were...
That's the church at the other end.
Yeah, the other end of the thing. Approximately $140 collected by Terra Linda Boy Scouts in their recent bicycle sale was presented to the Terra Linda Volunteer Firemen's Association. The money was placed in a fund administered by the association for the benefit of injured firemen. Lieutenant Colonel Lyman Woodman was marshal of the parade, which opened the festivities to musical accompaniment by the non-marching band playing aboard a flatbed truck.
If you stay in 20 years, you go out as a lieutenant colonel, unless
In
you're...
parade units included the Terra Linda's 2 fire engines, the Boy and Girl Scouts, Mariners, Cub Scouts, Brownies, Campfire Girls, Bluebirds, and decorated automobiles carrying members of the Terra Linda Drama Group, Terra Linda Teen Club, and youngsters in the community nursery school. It's basically a recap of the last article.
Yeah,
The Terra Linda Firehouse was built at a cost of approximately $2,000. Contractors, merchants, and community residents donated much of the labor and materials. The station provides enclosed shelter for one fire engine and a carport for partial shelter of the other. Eventually, it will be enlarged to provide enclosed shelter for both. Fire protection for Terra Linda is provided by the Community Services District, which has 20 active and 6 associate volunteer firemen.
oh, that was another thing I was going to tell you about, was the great fire at the firehouse.
There are several ones of those that are in my list to ask you about. However, on the parade that you may or may not have seen, because you may have been stuck at Marine
Yeah, I
Corps
think I
things,
was,
it didn't say that you were at Marine Corps thing, and usually that's listed in Mom's calendar. So you might have been with this. Do you remember
I
any
don't
of this?
remember
Bob?
being at
Well
that.
then,
I probably was
okay.
over at
Well,
Treasure Island.
About 20 years after the event of this, there's a letter to the editor, also in the IJ, which says, "Band concert stirs some fond memories. I read your preview of tonight's Las Colinas Valley Sanitary District Non-Marching Band, only it's just the initials, concert with great pleasure. I think of the fate of our two juniors who have followed the band. Number one is a toddler, number two in a stroller, from the dedication of the Terra Linda Fire Station, where they heard a remarkable rendition of I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, to last year's Point Reyes Livestock Parade, where they were performers. I'm reminded that the toddler is now a respected member of the Leland Stanford Junior University Marching Band, and the stroller is a scholarship winner in the Oregon State University Symphonic Band. One of them really does practice. As the wife of a long-standing Las Colinas Valley Sanitary District non-marching band member, I'm looking forward to a fine concert tonight. So the beginning of the fire department and the beginning of the Las Colinas Valley Sanitary District non-marching band, that was apparently their first big event.
Yeah, well,
They
the guy
started
lived,
just
I
to
think,
like a
in
little bit.
Marinwood.
And they could only figure that the only thing that they had in common was they were all in the same sanitary district.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the actual name of the sanitary district. They were all drained by the same source. Chicken Valley was what it was when you converted it to English, but it was.
Yes, it's the Valley of the Chickens, and there's some theories as to which particular bird might have been referred to as chickens, because of course there weren't actual chickens.
Road runners, probably.
There were some kind of critter, and there's arguments as to whether or not they're a particular endangered bird around here. So after all this hoo-ha on the 16th, then we have Friday, January 23rd, Leo Fire Meeting. Tuesday, January 27th, Leo Fire Lecture. Thursday, January 29th, Leo Fire Lecture. That is to say you were going to lectures or you were giving
to class.
Yes. And the next entry for that is Sunday, March 15th. And the reason, of course, that after Thursday, January 29th, there's a sort of a gap in things is I'm born on January 30th, the next day. And so there's a little bit of a time where Mom is not adding to her calendar too much because she's somewhat busy.
And recovering.
Yes, exactly. So the next thing is Sunday on March 15th, 4:30 Fire Department Buffet, which I assume is an auxiliary thing where they're
I guess.
having some sort of thing, meeting or whatever, meeting and party on March 15th. Then Wednesday, May 20th, Terra Linda Fire Department Auxiliary Meeting, which is the wives of everybody
Yes.
Doing fundraising. Then Monday, June 1st, Leo Fire Meeting. Saturday, June 20th, Leo Fire Drill, 9 to 12. Monday, August 24th, Leo Fire Department class. And amidst all this, Wednesday, February 4th, according to the IJ, with various stuff to do with Terra Linda, the board of the Terra Linda Community Services District the board tabled a proposal to purchase a resuscitator for the Terra Linda Fire Department. The reason District President John P. Namey said today was uncertainty about how our funds will turn out for the rest of the year. Cost would be about $540.
So we did it on our own.
Yes, may assist. Namey said he learned after last night's meeting that the Terra Linda Firemen's Auxiliary, that is to say, the folks who were having the
housewives.
aforementioned, the housewives who were having the buffet, etc., may assist to raise funds for a resuscitator through ticket sales for a future production of the Ross Valley Players.
Well, I
and
just
then it
remember the day at the center down there.
There also was a point in Wednesday, April 8th, where the members of the Dixie School District were trying to find out if a school to be located on Las Galinas Avenue, 600 feet south of Manuel Freitas Parkway, will not be within the boundaries of the Terra Linda District, and whether or not they should pay for getting fire services district. This is apparently what ended up being, oh, how can I be low battery? Am I unplugged? Close. Okay, we have to stop for a bit. Indeed, we have stopped. Even plugged in, it needs to charge up on juice. It seemed